So it was highly experiential, highly emergent, rather than prefixed. And it took me to a deep place within myself.
Thanks.
Yeah, a deep and peaceful place, I think I would say. I mean, after quite a long time, I just decided out of interest to go along to an introductory evening. And it had a powerful effect on me. I was astonished at, being able to, with a complete stranger, I mean, a young woman as it happened, um, to within a few minutes to through the practice or starting with eye contact and no speaking, establish what's felt like an extraordinarily powerful connection. And it startled me. I thought nothing, at 76, that nothing would particularly surprise me, but I actually was deeply surprised. I'm Willie Grieve. I'm 76. I'm retired. I had a background in management within organizations in the social welfare field. And a training in psychology. One of the people who was there was a good friend of mine who I've known since university days. So we've known each other for, I don't know, gosh, the best part of almost 60 years. And we had both independently, once we realized we were there, independently formed the view that we didn't want to do circling with each other. And I think probably for the same reason, that because we knew each other so well, it felt as if there was a thicket of undergrowth, of history, of, seasons we'd been through in our friendship and so on. And I suppose the fear was that that would contaminate the circling itself, that there would just be too much history there. So because because we realized that's the way that we felt, we decided, well, let's try it and see what happens. And we did. And I think both of us were deeply surprised because after the initial, meeting of eyes and that settling in bit that can feel quite, disconcerting. There's invariably a kind of self-consciousness about it, maybe especially actually with somebody that you know or have known for a long time. But anyway, once that we were past that point, we actually both had a powerful sense of connection that in a way went deeper than the friendship that we had. We were able to kind of rest in each other. In fact, somebody that evening, I think, used that phrase about resting and finding that you could rest in the other person's eyes or rest in the other person. And it reminded me of another description that I'd heard about circling being a kind of form of interpersonal meditation. And that rang true for me, that it was possible to just simply be at peace with the other person, even without speech, without words, simply having eye contact, even with an old friend. I suppose it quickly became apparent to me that this was the most experiential course I've ever done. It was entirely experiential. And that took a bit of adjusting too.
Mhm.
Uh, in fact, at one stage, um, I wouldn't say challenged the facilitators, but I mean in a pretty, relaxed state and with some sense of safety. I said to the facilitator something like, are you folk doing your job here in the sense that, you know, there's not a lot appearing to be happening. Now, at face value, that's quite a challenging thing to say. But the sense I had was that it was received quite undefensively. Um, I mean, very undefensively. There was no kind of kickback against that, um, or challenging me for having said it. It was as if the facilitators kind of absorbed it, considered it, reflected on how they themselves were feeling, and it actually, led the whole group into a very reflective, deeply reflective session, um, uh, which I mean, I personally found very useful to me because, I mean, I don't know how much to go into the detail of the thing, but what I'd said on one level was quite risky. And I discovered that internally in me, um, there was a sense that I was beginning to put up defensive walls as if I was anticipating that there was going to be a kind of strike back or kickback, or that in some way I would be punished for having said what I said. And such was the sense of safety somehow, that I was able to reflect that back to the group and say, this seems to be happening to me. And I'm realizing that it's arising because of what I said. And I'm realizing there's a pattern in me that when I take a risk, by saying something that might be a bit challenging or spiky or whatever, there's always an assumption in me that, I'm going to get whacked for it on some level. And so, almost proactively, I begin to put up these, defensive walls to shield myself from attack. Anyway, what surprised me was the clarity with which I was able to see this, and which I'd never seen so clearly before. So I think what I took from that was that, whatever the process is, it seems to engender, a strong sense of safety in in which, something that might just be an automatic process that you're not even aware of that happens within you, um, you actually somehow have the time and the sense of safety to be able to observe what's happening within yourself, and to look at it almost from the outside. I mean, I don't mean in a depersonalized sense, but just simply to be able to go, wow, look at that, look what's happening. So for me, that was really unusual, and I think other people in the group were experiencing. I mean, for example, I remember somebody saying, or that may have been actually on the second day, saying, "I'm realizing that I'm beginning to withdraw because I can anticipate what I'm going back to, i.e., living on my own, and and the comparison between this sense of shared deep sharing and the kind of relative isolation or loneliness of living on my own is so powerful that I'm beginning to, as it were, protect myself by beginning to withdraw. Um, and the interesting thing is that in saying that, the person was able to not do that, by surfacing it and making it public within the group. And of course, people respond to that, and it kind of meant that it didn't happen. So there were a number of incidents like that that just struck me as unusual. And I mean, I do go to residential groups, which are in which there's normally a high sense of trust. People are very, very willing to explore what's going on in their lives and so on. So, I'm not a stranger to those kinds of group sessions, and but this was unusual. The degree of I don't know, I suppose, honesty and self-awareness, even compared to those other groups, was quite unusual for me. My sense leaving that workshop was that the world felt like a very safe place. Somehow there was a deep sense of, safety, um, uh, which, I attribute to the process that happened over the 2 days. So yeah, I would think that's the main thing, kind of open and available. Like I went home and had, a pretty long discussion with my wife, which, was very, very open and, it's not that we don't have open discussions, but I mean, I was struck by how kind of available I was emotionally, because my sense is, most of the time, most of us go around with some kind of invisible shield of some sort. That's difficult to define, but that you're kind of not exactly looking out the visor of a tank, not to that extent, but that there's some holding back of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And but the sense was that had gone, that invisible shield had sort of melted away. So yeah, open-heartedness, openness, sense of safety, sense of being at peace, actually, were the main things, I think, for me. I gave that specific example of these defensive shields.
Yeah.
And on the weekend, there was another incident where they came up again. And again, I had a very vivid sense of what was happening and was able to describe it within the group. And so I came away with a specific knowledge which I hadn't really had before, about one aspect of my way of relating to people. So I would imagine if I'm in a situation where I find myself getting angry or fearful or defensive, that there might be a better chance of me being able to say to him or her or them, this is what's happening with me just now. I mean, one of the things I was able to say in the group when it was happening was, um, and this was the second incident with a particular person, and I was able to say, look, I know you want to talk about what's happened between us, but right at the present moment, it probably would be counterproductive because I know that my shields are up, and therefore, I wouldn't really be able to respond fully and authentically. But I know that, the shields will come down. Just give me a bit of time and that'll happen. And then we'll be able to talk. And that worked, as it were. That's what happened. In fact, the very process of talking about it helped my defenses to come down. So yeah, in terms of that particular defensive routine, that's clearer to me, and I think would be useful, as I say, in times where I'm interpersonally angry or upset or fearful or whatever, to be able to surface that, to make it visible, rather than just kind of reacting from it in an unthinking kind of way. This isn't probably a snappy way of describing it, but it was emergent. In other words, there wasn't it didn't feel to me there was a pre-planned program of, this will happen at 10 o'clock, this will happen at 1 o'clock, and so on. But it didn't feel like that. It felt as if it depended on what emerged from, both the facilitators and the participants. So it was highly experiential, highly emergent, rather than prefixed. And it took me to a deep place within myself.
Thanks.
Yeah, a deep and peaceful place, I think I would say. In terms of the facilitation during the weekend, my sense was that Dermot and Ruth and Ben were, in the best sense of the word, without an agenda, in the sense that they didn't come across as, we are therapists who are here to help you to fix yourselves, or to help you to identify, what your wounds are, or there wasn't any of that. It was like there was a sense of we're all here together as equal human beings on a journey of, finding out who we are. And that's kind of unusual because, in fact, very unusual, because normally in any facilitated event, there's a kind of agenda. Here's the compass bearing, there's where we're heading, here are the, desired outputs, or, performance indicators or something. But with this, there wasn't that at all. It was like, almost like, let's celebrate our capacity as human beings to explore who we are, and, to be at peace with each other in that. So, yeah.